So the one, the few, and the many. The story of the one, the few, and the many over the course of Western civilization tends towards the empowerment of the many. As we move closer and closer to the establishment of the United States, we see a world in which multitudes begin to have a power that they never had before. Now, one of the interesting things that takes place within the early settlement of North America is that you find many individuals who couldn't practice the religion the way they wanted to, sail across the ocean and establish new covenants amongst themselves, new covenantal communities. Many a Puritan will find their way, for example, into New England. And one settlement in New England was led by a man named John Winthrop, who was a very great theological authority. He had a great legal background. He was an individual of great learning. In fact, we know that many of the individuals who become part of these Puritan communities were made up a lot of the upper middle class in England. So they were well-read. They knew their theology. They knew what they were doing. They were brave individuals who crossed that ocean. There was no Holiday Inn waiting for them on the other side. So getting here, they very much wanted a vigorous establishment of a great covenantal community. And as I mentioned before, they very much pay adherence to the Bible, and they very much pay adherence to the moral authority of God, but they likewise grant the people of that covenantal community a great amount of power. They're not going to be led by popes. They're going to lead themselves. So Winthrop, the individual who is leading over this community, has a very difficult challenge. On the one hand, he has to direct his flock towards God and try to instruct them how to continue to have this adherence toward moral responsibility. But he also has to pay a certain respect to them that a leader, a king, would not have to. So what happens over the course of Winthrop's rule over this community is that some people start a whisper campaign against him, and he's indicted for a crime, and he's brought to court. He's brought to be challenged, and his authority is questioned. So he gives this great speech called A Little Speech on Liberty in 1645. And he wants to do, I think, two things in this speech. He wants to, A, define what a good covenantal community is, but B, he wants to do something very important. He wants to, much like Tocqueville says needs to be done, he wants to instruct democracy. He wants to instruct those people who have been won over by their newfound power. And how does he best instruct those people who have indicated that somehow he's abused his authority? Well, he tells them, you have to be careful with the liberty that you've been granted by being given power as a multitude. So he'll tell us that there are two types of liberty. So what's a covenantal community? What's a good covenantal community? And then secondly, what is a proper and improper use of liberty? Well, on the covenantal community front, he suggests the following. Every human group gathers together and they have to assign authority to someone. And most of the time they assign authority to a leader. And that leader has different skill sets. Sometimes that individual is a very impressive leader, executes his authority with great flair and does the job well. But oftentimes that leader makes a mistake. Any individual can make a mistake at any given time, and they can do so simply because there's an error in their ways. It wasn't purposeful. For that type of leader leading a covenantal community, you can't hold that person's error against them. You can, however, if that individual is unfaithful to the covenantal community. So here, I think he's trying to tell his flock is that you charge me with this crime thinking that I was unfaithful to you. But perhaps I've made mistakes. But to make a mistake is to be different than to be unfaithful. If I'm unfaithful to you, you have every right to charge me with a crime. But then the second part of his lesson, very interesting. Here's the reason why you charge me with this crime, even though there was maybe an error in my ways. You charge me with this crime because you took the liberty, to think that I was guilty of something that I didn't do. And he says there are two types of liberty in this world. One he calls natural liberty, and the other he calls civil or moral liberty. We share natural liberty with all creatures of this world. But natural liberty in and of itself is a liberty to do anything, even wrong things, is a liberty to be animal-like. That type of liberty is a liberty that you employed in charging me with these things. You let your passions deem me guilty. So your liberty led you astray. But there's another type of liberty called moral liberty. And that moral liberty is the liberty that we gain when we have belief in God, and our belief in God sets us free from sin. It's that proper employment of liberty where we are brought together in holy communion with one another in a covenantal community. And it's that type of liberty that you, the demos, that you, the multitude, must employ as you have sway over society, events, etc. If you choose natural liberty over moral liberty, the end game of democracy, not only in this colony but all colonies, will be a destructive path. So a reminder to Democrats from a religious leader to employ the right type of liberty, right, in the pursuit of godliness.